Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 251. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of The Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Alex R. Johnson about his debut novel, Brooklyn Motto. This book, set in New York City in 1998, is Alex's take on classic noir detective fiction. In it, Nico, a disillusioned private investigator, makes his living by photographing municipal employees suspected of insurance fraud. He's approaching 30, wondering where his career is going, and realizing he has to grow up and start making active choices about his life. During one of his PI jobs, Nico witnesses a murder involving a corrupt police officer. While he has no desire to entangle himself in anything involving police corruption, he's left with no choice but to investigate and solve the case before more people end up dead, including himself. In this episode, I'll chat with Alex about his writing journey, the ways in which his main character's life reflects his own in New York City during the late 1990s, and the particular frustrations of being a screenwriter that led him to write this novel, as well as a few other things, coming up. Alex R. Johnson, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your new novel, Brooklyn Motto. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Sure. So Brooklyn Motto is a take on kind of classic noir detective fiction, but it takes place in 1998 Giuliani era New York City. It's a murder, police corruption mystery, but at the same time, it's also about being 28, that period of your life where you're realizing that you've got to start making decisions, you've got to take control, you need to go from being passive to active. And so in my novel, my detective is a kind of a reluctant detective in that he doesn't have a very sexy PI job. He works for a lawyer who gets hired by the city whenever there's an insurance claim over a certain amount for a municipal worker. And he just goes out with his camera and just kind of photographs them, just trying to make sure they're not, jumping on a trampoline or taking their trash out. And if he does see something like that, then the evidence is used to have the insurance claim rejected. So he sort of doesn't like his job. He's not impressed by his job. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's sort of wandering through life. And then he's following a police officer who, through the actions of the evening, seems obviously corrupt. And while he's sitting on his house, two other police officers show up and murder that officer and his wife inside the house. And so that sort of starts the series of bodies and chaos getting thrown in around him, where he has to kind of decide, am I going to walk away from this and just ignore it, or am I going to do something about it? Am I going to investigate it? And that's what he does. And that's the beginning of his career as an investigator. I came up with it, or wanted to write it, mostly for a few reasons. One, I'm a screenwriter primarily, and a lot of people don't realize that frequently you can have a very successful career as a screenwriter and not have anything get made, or not have many things get made. Each studio buys about 100 to 200 scripts a year, and they make about 2 to 5 movies a year. So you could you could be working and making a living, but your stuff isn't getting made, and it can be frustrating, especially because you lose that world. You know, once you sell the script, you lose the characters, you lose the world you created, and you know, you are getting paid. So don't cry for me, but you are getting paid. But at the same time, you know, that's not why we write and tell stories, right? We tell them so people can hear them, and we want to share them. So it sort of bloomed out of that frustration, but also that I at one point I was adapting a novel for Sony. The novel was called Big Bucks by Ernest Tidyman, who Ernest created Shaft and wrote most of the Shaft books. Later, they were ghostwritten, but he also wrote the French Connection screenplay, High Plains Drifter. He was a really accomplished screenwriter, and he was really about empowering writers, like trying to have writers, even in the 70s, find a way to be more in control of their work. He died tragically very young, 52. That happens when you start smoking at 12, which he supposedly did. But he really inspired me, and I've been a Columbo freak my whole life. And every writer wants their own detective, you know. Every writer wants to create a detective. So I decided I was going to do it, and I decided to kind of also make it a bit of a investigation of self as I'm getting older, and I have questions about me and my past. The people that can answer them are either gone or not doing well. And so you got to kind of look inwards a little bit. So I normally avoid making a character similar to me. In it, you know, as you feel like you've got to, it's too easy. I'm going to increase the level of difficulty and make it really hard. So I'm not going to write about me. But I've always been, you know, wanted to explore my mixed cultural heritage. My mother's Ecuadorian, you know, the child of immigrants. My father is second generation Irish American, and it was, you know, there was tension growing up with relatives, with family, with friends. You know, you're typically not brown enough for the brown side, and you're typically not white enough for the white side. So I kind of wanted to explore that in some ways, and so that was another aspect of the novel.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your main character who becomes this private eye a bit by fate,
Mhm.
maybe. Describe a bit more about Nico. I mean, we you just mentioned he's of mixed cultural heritage, but what else do we learn about him in this book?
Well, you know, he's his father passed away early. His father was a musician and a heroin addict, and you know, one of those, like, a very good musician that had some success but never became huge. And he has a strained relationship with his father, and his father is more present in the book than the mother, who's really absent in this novel. Mostly because I think sometimes the people that have left us are, I don't know, they're in our heads more than the people that are right here. So Nico's kind of always kind of processing his past with his father. He lives in his, you know, he inherited his father's old apartment. That was one of the few things that his father didn't sell off in his many in his kind of like heroin binges. And so he's always living in the shadow of his father, and always kind of like trying to figure out his dynamic with his father. I think again, as I get older, and now that I have a son, I feel like, you know, from my perspective, everything is just a parent-child relationship is pretty much at the core of how every dynamic and how we live our lives. And so I found that intriguing. So, you know, in one way that Nico connects with his dad, even with his dad being absent, is that one way that they bonded was through film. And his father, you know, repeatedly discussed about how his father took him to revival cinema all over New York when he was growing up, or when he was with him on the weekends. And so that kind of lingers in Nico's present. And so, and me, myself being a film person, and also I feel like New York is such a cinephile town, you know, I have kind of like film references throughout the novel. If something reminds Nico of a shot or a movie, it's described or echoed in his first person narration, and that goes out throughout the novel. But you know, it's really it's really about for him, uh, we I'm looking back, so it's hard to, sometimes it's about me looking back and sometimes it's about looking forward from that age. But, from looking back perspective, we always think that we have more time. We always think that we're going to get another shot to do this type of thing. And there is a moment in your 20s to 30s where, if you're present enough, you wake up to it and you become more present. So it's sort of where he is also in his life, having to make active choices. But it's also, funny and sarcastic, and it's hard not to be in the first person narration and do that. I never, as a screenwriter, I don't do first person narration, and I found it, absolutely intoxicating. I was like, oh, this is amazing. I'm not, no, this is so much fun, just flowing. And then of course you hit a spot and then I got deep into the novel and I was like, oh, but I can only show what he sees. And then you realize that, oh, it has its limitations and how do we pull out of that and how do we do things? So, it was an exercise, but still a joy to kind of do that.
Yeah, I think writers either love it or hate it, that first person perspective, right? For exactly the reason you said it.
Yeah.
You can really, you're in the character's head. So it's just, it breaks that wide open for the writer and the reader. But at the same time, it's just that perspective. You can only
Yeah.
see through that character's eyes. It's freeing and handcuffing you at the same time. It's a weird, yeah, it's a weird thing to struggle with, I think.
Yeah, I've one of the plots of the second novel of the second in the series that I'm just starting to work on that I've kind of been writing as an attempt to pull out of that. The mother basically there's going to be multiple chapters with the mothers telling a story, kind of a mystery of their family's past. And so every few chapters we'll kind of like revisit that story. So that'll be third person as the mother's telling the story. So we can kind of like get a break from that I kind of thing. So, but it is, gosh, I mean, the first 12 pages, I think, just leapt out of me first person. It was just like, and then obviously, it hit the reality set in, but it is fun. It's,
Yeah.
it's a fun thing to do.
Well, let's talk about the setting because for
Yeah.
most noir detective novels, setting plays a big role. It really sets the mood, if nothing else. So why New York City
Mhm.
and why 1998?
Well, the original concept for these stories, they came out of like projects I abandoned at various points. But in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was writing about, I was trying to write a mystery about, it's going to sound really sexy, zoning and real estate in the
Mm-hmm.
in the Williamsburg waterfront. But it just it came to me then. I think that first of all, New York City, because that's if I'm kind of investigating myself. I know New York City in the 90s. It was a really fascinating and frustrating time to be in New York. Being in your 20s under Giuliani was a strange existence, that kind of pre 9/11 era where, Giuliani was raiding bars where people were dancing because they didn't have cabaret licenses. And it was just this heavy police enforcement, action after action. I mean, everybody has stories about, undercover cops coming to them and trying to get them to buy weed, and you're just like, I don't want, you're obviously a cop and I don't want to buy, I'm not even looking for it. Like, leave me alone. But there was just endless entrapment and also just, pretty horrific corruption. And so while Giuliani was winning points with kind of like older white constituents about like quality of life stuff, he was really making life hellish for people of color and poor people in the city. And so I like that setting, that tense time of, police. I actually come from a law enforcement family. My father is retired FBI, career FBI. My mom was retired CIA. My godfather was a DEA agent. So like I've been around law enforcement, but I've also lived in New York City in the 90s. So I know what and just from what was happening with Amadou Diallo and other police issues. And so I really wanted to investigate kind of that idea of like not big time corruption, but how small little corrupt acts can kind of like ripple into your life. And that's sort of what happens here. So that's why. And then in 1998, I just figured if I'm doing some sort of investigation of self, why not do it in an era where I felt invincible? Yeah. When I was in my late 20s and I didn't know what hangovers were, and and I could stay out till 4. But not the case anymore. So that was really that. I'm really fat. I really, having lived through all that era in New York City, there is the pre 9/11 era right there. Then there's, obviously 9/11. And what I'm really fascinated with investigating in the next novel is the period just after 9/11. There was this period where New York City was in a coma. And so in order to kind of like have that contrast, I definitely wanted to have something set first before I got to that point. So yeah, and I wrote it during COVID when I was living in Austin, Texas. My family is from New York, but then we moved to Austin for 10 years. And I think after about 3 years there, we started talking about leaving, but we could never figure out how to leave. And the plan was to move further west for my film work. But once COVID hit, it just seemed ridiculous to move away from East Coast family even further. And we were just like, we should go home. And during that time, I was writing the novel, and it was, like being home, when I was there. Another probably 1998, also just as probably as far back as I can take it and still remember things. But I found my date book from 1998. And so I used to be in freelance film production, and I would need to use a date book so I wouldn't to put my bookings in, and so I wouldn't get double booked and all that stuff. And but also there were bands and movies and all my social life, dates that I were hoping were dates that didn't turn out to be dates, things like that. And it kind of brought everything back in a clearer way. And then I was just to kind of put my head back in it. I bought a few Village Voices off eBay from November 1998. Just flipped through, looking at the ads. I mean, it's just, Village Voice in New York when you were, in your 20s and 30s was just your Bible, pre-internet. It had all the band listings, all the club listings, comedy, music, everything that you would theater, everything you would need, and you just carried it around everywhere and just you always looked at it. So once I saw, I mean, it's funny seeing all the ads and just getting sent back and just things became clear. I tried not to delve into any era that I might have difficulty describing perfectly. I knew that I would get I just knew in terms of my circle of friends, I would get uh, you know, very, very critiqued in terms of getting something wrong. But in the early beta reading process, I had lots of people that were happy to correct me on things I got wrong, or misremembered. But yeah, and I just think it's also just interesting it was an interesting time in New York City. It was just before Williamsburg, and Brooklyn was happening, but Williamsburg now is all glistening towers full of finance bros, and there's Prada store, there's all these insane stores. The first party I went to in Williamsburg in 1997 was in an old pretzel factory that got its power from an extension cord that plugged into a street light outside, and you had to go to the bathroom in a bucket. So it's just it's all that stuff was kind of planned, like the way that it turned, and real estate was heavily involved. And I wanted that to be part of the plot, to kind of like see how could this kind of start. And also it's about a changing New York. It's I don't think you can write a book about New York without talking about a changing New York, because that is what it does. I'm mad about a bar being gone, but then the bar turned into a bagel store, and now somebody's mad that that bagel store is gone, that never knew the bar. So
Right,
it's
right.
just it's a city of ghosts, both real and, you know, real estate ghosts and all that. So it's yeah, so that's all part of it.
When you were writing it, how much research did you find yourself doing? I mean, you mentioned the Village Voice and things like that.
Oh, lots. I mean, I was, I mean, I research, some of it gets a little into Giuliani and politics and kind of like sort of remembering like there's a little period in there where somebody's talking about the basically the riot that Giuliani led on the mayor's office in before he won for mayor, and you forget like I wasn't really active. I wasn't present in politics then, so I had to kind of throw myself, into that. But it wasn't a tremendous amount. I mean, it sounds silly just flipping through a voice or whatever, but if you're a writer, if I've been writing even when I was in production, I was writing and trying to get out of, film production and getting into writing. I mean, I feel like I was writing the book and I was remembering things that I had logged in my 20s as just like, that's cool. That should be in a book. I've been holding on to, phrases or images or things like that. But really it was, almost most of my friends are still in New York that are my age that I was with then. And so they helped a lot. But yeah, there's Village Voice, things like that. And like I said, I mean, I was also like digging through Flickr, old Flickr accounts of the 90s, the beginning of like photo blogging and things, looking for like 1990s New York things, going through YouTube. Sometimes you can just find these unedited hours of videotapes of like New York City Spring Day, 1997 or something like that,
Right,
so
right,
throwing yourself into that because it was important to feel present. And at the same time, it was important. I had to, that's one of those things like with the first person, I had to learn to edit that need, that desire to just be like, well, I love that place. I have to, that was the best coffee in New York. I have to mention it. And it's like, I don't really need to mention it. I can't find a way to get that person there just to be like, I remember this place. So, there's a lot of that has to happen.
right.
And everybody has their own New York and everybody has their own neighborhood that was their life. And they see everything from this perspective and you see it from your New York, which is over here. So no one's ever going to be like you got it perfect. But I've had enough positive response from folks of the era that I feel like okay, I did okay,
Right, right.
yeah.
Were there any disagreements, let's say, among your beta readers or people giving you input? Like, no, 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 it wasn't like that. It was like this. No, 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 that wasn't there. It was here. We didn't do it then. We did it over
It's
later.
it was funny. It was like one of the things I was so right, there's an old coffee shop called Odessa, and it was on Avenue A, and it's 24 hours. And so Avenue A between like 7th and 8th, right across from Tompkins. If you were out in the East Village and Alphabet City at night, you went there eventually, especially when you're young and you're like, yeah, let's have an entire other meal at 3 a.m. And I remember calling it the Odessa. And I was being so grumpy about this because no one I went to was like, we didn't call it the Odessa, it's Odessa. And it was one of those, I guess it was almost like the Berenstein Bears
Hmm.
thing. I was like, no, it's the Odessa. And I didn't want to change it, but then I did because everybody corrected me on it. But it and that's also folds into the idea of like everybody has their New York. In my New York, I said the Odessa, but I'm not running the book just for me. So I adjusted it, but it was fairly. A lot of people were reminded of things, but then a lot of people also were like, "Why didn't you write about this?" And I was like, "Well, that was part of your life. That wasn't part of my life. I couldn't write as clear a picture of that image of that place or setting as you probably could." So,
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your background and experience and how that played into this novel because you've talked a little bit about it already. But I'm curious if being a filmmaker and a screenwriter helped in writing the novel, if it made it easier or did it make it more challenging at times? I'm curious the push and pull between what you knew and then this new project.
Yeah, I mean, I think I am a writer that suffers from constant imposter syndrome, you
Mm.
know? So, I don't know, it was something about my era, the guilt dumped on me, who do you think you are, or whatever. But I really, and in the same way about filmmaking, where I was like, I have to start as a PA, I have to work my way up. And I did that. I went from PA to executive producer, and I just, so the imposter syndrome for writing a novel was uh overwhelming. You know, who do you think you are type of thing. So I had to get past that. I mean, I'm a fairly literary screenwriter, and that is a phrase that can be used as a compliment or an insult based on what type of producer you are. So it has been told to me as a compliment and an insult before. So I love descriptions and things like that. I think it's really important. And we're kind of living in an era of more literary screenwriting. It's been that way for about 20 years. It wasn't that way before, but now it really is. So you just need to, you need to be efficient. You still have to not get too wordy, and you do lots of passes where you're like, you want, I think it should leap off the page. I think I should be setting the tone for how you read my screenplays, set the rhythm. You can do that through like how you lay it out on the page, how much white is on the page, ellipses, em dashes, you're my best friend. So it was nice to have a little more freedom in terms of like getting deeper with description or internal reflection, which I can't do at all. That I really enjoyed. But the biggest hurdle beyond the imposter syndrome is just, getting used to the page count, the word count, not getting frustrated. Took a while to get there, having days where I didn't write anything and I just sat there and, or God, I ended up with a negative because I edited something, like that was hard. I mean, you can write a screenplay pretty fast if you know what you're doing or you have it outlined or you have your kind of like notes that lay it all out. So, and again, I told you the first 12 pages I think I wrote on the first day and I was like, this is easy. And then I hit a wall pretty quickly after that. And it just became I had to just t talk to myself about like set a realistic goal of below what I would actually like to hit. You know what I mean? Like 250 words, 500 words, something like that. And hit it and try to go past it and just be happy that I did and not beat myself up about it otherwise. But I feel like having done it once, I had a friend that ran marathons and I talked to them about it once and I asked them how much they train. And she was like, I don't train. I run 8 marathons a year. I just run like 1 or 2 miles for exercise. And I was like, well, how can you run a marathon? And she was like, well, I know the timing now. I know the pacing. I know how my body will feel at the different stages. I know when not to push myself. I know when to. So, and I feel like now having done the novel that the next one, I'll be calmer about it. You know what I mean? Like understanding that, there is an end and there are going to be these days where not much happens, but I loved it I've always wanted to write a novel and I've always been a writer and a reader and I think I just always just again like I beat myself up about not not thinking I was qualified to do it and that's so whenever I talk to people I'm always I'm like if you write an email clearly if you write an essay you can write a novel it's just you just have to understand the time it takes and the um the patience that you need to be with the patience you have to give yourself honestly to fail and get better and all that stuff so I really think that because I try to like I do a lot of mentoring sometimes in the guild and I just people should just I feel like I didn't do a lot of things earlier in my life because I just I don't know, Catholic guilt or whatever that I couldn't do it. or who do I think I am? So I try to erase that whenever I talk to people and just be like, no, you can do
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah. Yeah.
just takes time.
Right. Right. Like you said, it's very much like a marathon. It takes a very long time to get that out. Even if you write quickly, some writers I know write very quickly. It still takes a lot longer than writing an email or running a 50-yard dash. It's
And I was also used to, one thing with screenplays, I was used to pretty much like every time I sat down reading everything, like reading from the beginning to where I was in the script to kind of be in the moment. And then so making that adjustment, once I got deeper into the novel where I'm like, oh, I can't do this anymore. I can't, I'll never be
right.
productive. So, and then being like, okay, I'll bring it back like 2 chapters so I can feel the rhythm and then I'll go back into it type of thing. Yeah, it's just it's different, but it's like I said, I think if you can write a clear email,
You can do
you
it.
you can do it.
It'll take you longer, but you
It'll
can do
take
it.
a long time, but you can do it. Yeah, for sure.
Well, you mentioned that you're working on the second novel.
hmm
Is it easier? Like you said, you've done it once, so I'm sure there are things about it that are easier. But some writers kind of struggle with that follow up because it is a completely different experience to write the second one.
hmm
Is it going more smoothly?
Well, I'm still at kind of like I use my technique is essentially the same. It's not, revolutionary or anything, but sophomore year, Gonzaga High School in DC, Mr. Cannon taught us about, you know, the spillage page. And so, you used to have to turn in your essays, and the first page was a spillage, the second page was your first draft, and the third page was your final draft. And it was almost like the first 2 pages were more important than the final draft, like the process of getting there. So I still do this thing where I've transferred it to my notes app now because it syncs between my phone and my laptop. So I'm able to kind of do it wherever, if I'm on the subway. But I have notes, I have note files for all the things I'm trying to work on. And I just need that spillage. The whole thing with the spillage is you're not allowed to erase anything. You can't be embarrassed by it. You just have to put it, no one's going to see it but you, which is so hard to get over. But once you get over it, it's liberating. And it's kind of like for me, I did it when I was just starting to write my screenplay work because so often in screenplays, your second act is kind of where everything dies if you haven't really thought it out enough. And so this if I have a nice big meaty spillage, that gives me the kindling I need to keep the fire going. So I'm still in that process with the second novel. So it's kind of like comes out of order or just like I want to do this or I want to do that. And I know the plot and I know the structure since it's going to have this other element of his mother telling a story that kind of continues throughout. But it's I don't know. I haven't sat down to actually do the writing yet. I mean, I really need to I need to do a little day job stuff to keep my agents happy before I commit to that. And I probably will not tell them I'm writing the second book because they didn't like that when I was writing the first one.
Tell them when it's done.
Yeah, tell them when it's done because it took a lot of my attention.
Yeah.
But no, so I'm still doing the spillage, which is just kind of chaotic and just a mess. And then when it gets large enough, I'll start to organize it in terms of just order without deleting things, and then I'll just use it as like I said, my fuel to kind of like keep me going. So I need to write something else, and I'm hoping to start this in about 2 months.
Okay.
I'm gonna start. Yeah.
In the back of your mind, do you see it continuing? Do you see the storyline
I see
continuing?
three. I see three. I see a total of 3 books, including the
Oh,
first,
okay.
so we can see what happens. I I love how, to bring it back to Ernest Tidyman, if you're all familiar with the Shaft series, Shaft has all these amazing adventures in book after book after book, and then he's killed at the end of the last book by a teenager just robbing him for $10, and that's the end of the series, you know. And so some part of me is like, oh, I'm intrigued at that idea of like working my way towards that. But I'm not working towards a death. But I do know like so I said, I wanted to set one more thing in 2000 just before 9/11, and then I want to set the next one in 2002, which is really that weird period of New York City where everybody was just wandering in a daze, and occasionally fighter jets would zoom by and there were armed military on the bridge and stuff like that. Of course, we're approaching that again, uh, based on what city you live in, but for different reasons. But yeah, so that's what I see.
Okay. All right.
And then maybe I'll have another idea for something down the road,
Right.
you know.
Right. Okay. All right. But if you had to say goodbye to the character after 3, you think maybe that would be
I
okay.
think so. I mean, I think by then I'm probably going to be like, I'm not going to really care about writing somebody in their early 30s.
You'll have
Maybe I'll
moved
leave.
on.
Oh, well, part of me is actually, I did think about after I get past these three, it might be intriguing to kind of like jump forward to a middle-aged Nico, and just try
Yeah.
to try to become a little more contemporary, and write a little more about the present
Right.
would be fun.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, it sounds like you're busy and will be for a while, quite a while.
So
So, if people want to learn more about you and the book and new releases when they're available, that sort of thing, where can they go to find you and that information?
So my website is haciendafilmsinc.com. So you need that INC or you're going to get sent to some film company in England. So haciendafilmsinc.com. There you can see all the information about the book, about my feature film that I directed called Two Step. You can get all the music videos that I direct. I still do a lot of directing, and so that's there. But if you want to just cut to the chase and go right to brooklynmotto.com, that will just be focused on the book, and it'll have links to where to get it. On Instagram, I'm Hacienda Films, at Hacienda Films, and Blue Sky, I'm at Hacienda Films. I got off Twitter, so I'm not on there. But yeah, so that's that. And if you want to buy the book, I ideally go to your local bookstore if you've got the patience, and ask them to order it. If you don't do that, there's always Bookshop. You can still support bookstores. And if you absolutely have to use Amazon, that's between you and your God.
All right. Well, Alex, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you luck with Brooklyn Motto and the follow up. We will look forward to that when it's available. So, congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated chatting.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the bookshop at the end of the internet.